I'm more interested in just being a human, and I want to experience all the friendships and all the emotions and all the books or all the sports, whatever it is that I'm interested in, not because this certain thing has been assigned to me because of my gender. When I heard you on that first podcast, you said something like, the book is not the physical thing. It's not the item. The book is just a way that you share your ideas with another person. It really tuned into, what is it that we're doing? Are we trying to generate volumes and volumes of paper that is maybe going to be recycled or maybe not at the end of its life? Or are we trying to share a story or an idea, something that is going to inspire somebody and make them think?
The lesson is essentially to everybody listening, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you really think this is what you should be doing and you love it, be true to yourself and keep at it. Believe in it, keep at it, do it, tell the story, share the message, and reach out, because there's nothing like community and the support of your community to allow you to express and just grow with your expression. Welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues. I'm your host, Ali Horiad. My goal in this program is to educate our audience about various global issues and how we can help. I met my guest about 6 months ago when she emailed me about a podcast I was interviewed on. The message was filled with love and gratitude. Naturally, I had to find out who sent me this deeply spiritual and amazing note. I traced her info to a website and came to her blog essays. One led to another, and I kept reading, and I almost read the whole website. A little more reading, and I found that we share too much to have never known each other, or even worse, to continue not knowing each other. So I responded to say I'm grateful for the kindest message, but more so for the treasure I found in the person behind the message. A few conversations later, and we're now collaborating on some projects together. I want to share and publicize my guests and our deeply spiritual conversations to amplify this shared force much more loudly than two people on a Zoom call, which is how the world is going these days. So Amber Byers is our guest, and she is now also recently a Compassiviste publishing author. She's an award-winning author, an editor, a writing coach, and a speaker. She's the founder and CEO of Tadpole Press and holds a BA in English from the University of Washington and a JD in law from the University of Arizona. Amber's published works include The Magic Door Origin Story, which is a sci-fi story inspired by her childhood, and Sophie and Spot, a favorite of mine, which won a gold medal. Amber's work is influenced by her identity and journey as a biracial and agender person. She's proud to be a member of the Sault Ste. Marie tribe of Chippewa Indians in Michigan. For those who don't know, please learn more about the Chippewa Indians and Indigenous community, not only within your region, but abroad as well. I'll share a few interesting facts. They operate their own police department and tribal court and have a population of about 45,000 strong. They have given over $30 million from slot revenue of their casinos, equivalent to over 2%, to charitable, infrastructural, and communal causes. Amber's Indian name actually translates to friend who walks with spirits. And I'll say now that her name is so representative of the person I've come to know and befriend. I wish we all adopt this kind of naming and intimate and descriptive pre-introduction to ourselves versus a name, the way we have it. Friend who walks with spirits. Amber Byers. This conversation is my honor, and welcome to Compassiviste Dialogues.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. That was such a touching intro. It just warmed my heart and made me smile. Thank you, Ali.
It's all true.
Yeah.
I come to learn. I love the naming. I mean, that's what it should be. And I think that's what it used to be in very olden days. people were named after their work or their trade, or they were somehow named to describe themselves. And
Yeah.
then somehow we graduated into what doesn't make sense anymore. So
Yeah.
now, for the audience who may not know, uh, please share a short introduction from childhood through growth, personal, academic, professional life, to today with Tadpole Press. How did a little baby who was just born transition into the powerhouse?
Yeah. I love how you say a short intro because that encompasses so much. I'm like, oof, what do we pull out? I'm always chuckle when people want to pigeonhole me into, oh, you were just an attorney turned writer, or oh, you're native
Mm.
diversity editor, or whatever it is, because I just have so many different facets of my personality that it's always interesting to see which piece resonates. So I guess as briefly as I can, from childhood up, I lived in an unusual situation where my older sister and I would spend 6 months out of the year with my dad in Oregon, and then 6 months out of the year with our mom in Illinois. And it was really a unique situation because the two places were very, very different. And it allowed us to grow up simultaneously in two different cultures and recognize that the education systems are different, the values are different, the societies and the cultures are different. And it sort of was like an outside perspective, as opposed to somebody who grows up in a single place is assumes this is just the way life is, when it's really not. It's optional. It's all a choice. Even what they teach in elementary school was very different. I recognized early on in my small town of Emden, Illinois, the history books taught about how Christopher Columbus discovered America, period, end of story. And I was like, well, that's interesting because it's my mom. That's where I was in Illinois, but it's my mom's side that's connected to the Native American ancestry and tribe and all of that. But there wasn't that discussion. And in Oregon, at my dad's, it was a bigger city, a more liberal city. There was more awareness of, well, let's discuss what happened when the settlers came and what that looked like for the indigenous populations. And you think as a kid what you see in the history book is just fact, but it's a fact that's chosen by whoever created that story and whoever is telling that tale. And so it was just an interesting kind of awareness to grow up with. And then I don't know how far to jump ahead, but I did. I was always creative as a kid and thought I would grow up and be an author, and then kind of grew up and forgot and thought I maybe when I was looking at grad school, maybe I'll go to law school, and did this whole detour in the legal field for about a decade and eventually got really burnt out of the arguing and the adversarial system and made my way back to the arts and specifically writing and creative writing and community building. So that's a very condensed version
Very
of
condensed.
yes.
Yes, very condensed.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on that because I moved to Canada uh, to go to university, basically, and I'd lived not as much, not like you, splitting 6 months of the year, but I'd gone to boarding school in Switzerland, and my family was
Mm,
in the UAE in Dubai, and so I grew up in a completely separate culture from the culture that inherently was mine. And there was a
mhm.
lot of clash because I would
Yeah.
learn of values in school that wouldn't kind of corroborate with the values at home in many different
Yeah.
ways. And as a child, it's confusing, but as you grow up, it becomes an insight of
Hmm.
there are multiple ways to see the same story.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Canada, and I was in Toronto, so it's this huge multicultural hub. And mind you, though I was in these two areas, um, at that time in Dubai, there wasn't this multicultural hub that there is today. There wasn't this development that there is today. So you really didn't get to see that many different identities. And it wasn't so liberal as well, which, kind of shut that down more. And then in boarding school, you're really only with a community of other kids and people who are identical in a way, because
Mm-hmm.
you may look physically different, but you're identical in every other way. You wake up at the same time, you eat at the same, everything's the same.
Mm-hmm.
So you get no understanding of the world, so to speak. And suddenly I go there and there's this huge community of all types of people. Yet it wasn't until somebody I knew, and this is 20 years after being in Canada. I mean, of course, yes, I saw the Indigenous community. Of course, yes, I saw art by the Indigenous community. I learned a lot about, you know, that perspective of um, they don't do anything with their lives. They're drunk. That kind of, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
rhetoric that is common. Unfortunately, it is common. And I heard that, and that was what I kind of took in, and I didn't know any more than Christopher Columbus, founded
Yeah.
America. And then I also started thinking, well, these people were there because, when they came, this is what
Mm-hmm.
happened. So there was somebody there. How did they get there? I mean, were they forever there, or did they migrate there from prior to
Yeah.
Christopher? Like, who are these people, right? Who are these
Yeah.
people? So, yeah, that started a conversation, but it was very kind of, way back burner, because even at the university, unless you were specifically taking your education was about the Indigenous community, there was not even electives. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't even take an elective to learn more about the community. I could take
Yeah.
electives to learn more about Judaism, about Islam, about certain cultural issues in Scandinavia. I could learn about the Latin American population, the history of the Incas, for example, but
Mm-hmm.
the Mayans, something. But there were no electives about the Indigenous community in North America, right?
Yeah.
It was very hush hush. And then
Mm.
one day, a friend of mine is crying. I said, "Why are you crying?" She says, "I just learned about the residential schools." And I was like,
Oh.
"What are residential?" Like, complete ignorance, right? It was never like,
Mm-hmm.
nobody even made a movie about it. Like, I would have at least thought that somebody would have made some kind of a movie about it, because this is up there with all of the
Yeah.
other crimes in the world, right? I mean, if you're going
Yeah.
to do the Holocaust, you do this as well. It's
Mm-hmm.
on par. Maybe the numbers aren't as high, but it's on par.
Yeah.
So, I that's when it triggered. I was like,
Mm-hmm.
wait a minute, there's so much lying going on here. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
And so I started touching base with, some of the Indigenous populations in the area,
Mm-hmm.
in Ontario, in our province. And I started seeing everything from a different light. And it wasn't until then that spirituality came into effect for me. Because up
Mm.
until that point, we're talking, I have, a postgrad, 3 master's degrees, 2 undergrad degrees, and all of that. But I still don't know much about myself, or the
Yeah.
self. I'm
Mm-hmm.
educated. I can do well in the schooling that I have. My spirituality kind of goes back to an ignorant or a veiled following of certain principles that are religion. You are this
Mm-hmm.
religion, you follow these things. On Sunday you go to church, on whatever your religion may be, right? And so there was no spiritual involvement in there. And this was the first impact for me of learning about that interconnectedness of life. And so
Mm-hmm.
I had, in my philosophy master's, I'd done this research about a philosopher called Spinoza. And he, without any reference to the Indigenous community, he talks about the interconnectedness of everything as one, everything as whole, right? And here I found it in life, in living, not in a philosophical context of a philosopher writing about we are all one, the planet is one, we have to take care of each other. No, I
Mm-hmm.
find it in living action. Like, that is transformed, it's manifested into how do you take that philosophy and actually enact it. And so I got really, really excited about learning about the principles. And then over time, I became an advocate, in a sense, of continuously arguing with doctor friends of mine who I would say, "Oh, you just discovered that? Well, you know what? My friend here has been doing this for, like, 15 generations."
Yeah.
And he's like, "But where's the research?" And I said, "They don't write anything. It's all oral histories that, goes down, and they just keep, sending it through generations." And so I have so much admiration, and I think it's so shameful that we can't get over this egotistic system of oppressive kind of teachings and histories and stuff, that we can't open the door to learn, even,
Mm-hmm.
because that's what it is to me. The Indigenous community brings in lessons that it's going to be so expensive for you to learn otherwise. So expensive,
Mm-hmm.
at the cost of a lot of lives, whereas it's readily available and nobody's tapping into it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was my 2 cents for that. Whenever I speak to somebody who is tied to, and especially the North American Indigenous communities from any
Mm-hmm.
various parts of it, I always feel like there has to be a way that we can, just the general public can wake up and say, there's more to learn, there's more to integrate, there's more to bring forth than just casinos and shops and using it for that purpose. I had friends who would
Mm-hmm.
drive up there just to get cigarettes tax free.
Mm-hmm.
That was the only interaction they had, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it didn't go beyond that. I used to go to the village and stay there, and I
Yeah.
learn, and it was so much education. I loved it, but we really need to do that.
Yeah.
Now, that brief introduction, yeah, that caught me in your introduction about yourself, and
Yeah.
obviously, so much of that childhood plays a part, because when you speak about Oregon and Illinois, I haven't lived in any of them, but I've been to both, and you are
Mm-hmm.
correct. For a lot of people who haven't been to any of them, they're vastly different places. It's
Mm-hmm.
um, lifestyle, the geography, even though they're not the furthest states from each other, but they
Mm-hmm.
are vastly different in terms of climate, a lot of things. So
Yeah.
you 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 girls probably would have experienced a lot growing up in those places. Now, you started your publishing house when
Mm-hmm.
you left law and thought, I'm going to go back to the roots of what I want to do and to what I love, and
Yeah.
called it Tadpole Press. Now,
Yes.
I personally think that has something to do with a metamorphosis of some kind.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so let's go into the name. What does that mean to you? Where does it come
Yeah.
from?
Yeah. It's funny because, especially when I was first starting out as a writer, coming up with names for my characters was hands down one of the trickiest things. And if I focused on it as I was writing, it could derail me into hours and hours of research of what's the meaning behind the name and what name do I want. And so when I came time to name my company, I had originally wanted something that captured that kind of beauty and magic of the natural world, and that feeling like, when you're a kid and you wish on a dandelion, and there's just all that hope and like beauty around you. And so I originally thought dandelion press. And for those of you who don't know, the second word press just means a small publisher. And that's very much me, because it was just me starting out. And so Dandelion Press, meaning dandelion publisher. So I was like, I like that name. And I Googled it and it was already taken. So I was like, okay, well, obviously that was a good one. And then I kind of went back to the drawing board and had lists and lists of names. And one day I was down at the creek by my house and I looked down. There was this little half tadpole, half frog. It really was in that in between phase where it had the tadpole tail, but it had sprouted the little legs, but they weren't
Mm.
full frog legs. And it was just exactly this interesting representation of both and the incredible transformation that happens. And I mean, these are very common creatures down by my creek, and I've always been very connected to place. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I could name it Tadpole Press. And so I went and, filed my articles of organization or incorporation, double check the name in the Secretary of
Mhm.
State's website, did all the things, paid the filing fees, got my company. And I don't remember how far later, it was probably within the first month or so, I abbreviated the initials for the first time and got to TP for Tadpole Press. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was a one thing I didn't do in all of my research and all of my lists and lists of names was look at what are the initials. And so I was like, that's also a very common initial for toilet paper, TP. And I was like, oh my gosh, I did not even think of that. And so for a split second, I was like, I could redo it. It's early enough. I could, cancel that, refile under a different name. And I just thought, you know what? What a gift that when I abbreviate it, it's a little reminder to me to not take myself too seriously and
Mm.
just to laugh about it instead of being embarrassed or trying to keep it under wraps or, whatever. And I was like, no, I think this is perfect. It's when I do see the initials, which I use sometimes, I love them. And it does kind of lighten my perspective. And I need that sometimes.
Mhm.
The law is a very serious place. And even writing and publishing can be a very serious place. And I just need a little bit of lightness in my life. So I kind of appreciate it, even though I didn't mean to have those initials when I initially, created it. But yeah, it is home now, I guess.
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. And
Yeah.
one of the books, your own book from
Hmm.
Tadpole Press, Sophie and Spot. We're going to speak about
Hmm.
that because I really love the story. It's something every adult and child should read. It's not just for children. It is a children's book in a sense. It's
Hmm.
slated that way, but I think just like many other stories, a lot of children's fables have adult value as well, in a sense,
Yeah.
because you know uh, I've actually written. I think one of the chapters in one of my books is about the courage that I get inspired by and learn from in the Cinderella story. So, as an
Yeah.
adult, you look at it in a completely different way versus as a 7-year-old, right? So,
Yes.
that's why I tell people read children's books. You get it, you get this different story from it, and
Yeah.
I was touched by it so much that we're featuring it in Compassiviste Publishing as well to extend
Yes.
its reach essentially, and
Hmm.
be a part of that because I think it's a powerful story, and we
Yeah.
need more of this type of messages through writing and in our books today. And essentially, as you know, we've spoken about this. This is the reason I started Compassiviste Publishing. It's because
Hmm.
I was like, there's so many people, so many amazing stories
Yeah.
who don't have, Barack Obama's reach, so they're not going to get the publicity for the storytelling that
Yeah.
somebody like that gets, right? And
Yeah.
though the stories are powerful and they come from very meaningful experiences and real life stories. I mean, um, you know, we have some of the biggest books that have fallen upon us strictly because we got lucky that it stayed in some way, like Autobiography of a Young Girl Going Through the Holocaust.
Mm.
It's a big book today, but it wasn't written to be published. In a sense, it wasn't written as a book that, hey, this should go to uh, you know Random House or Penguin Press, and they
Hmm.
should publish it and really market it. No, it was written authentically, and then it got to that level. But if
Yeah.
we now just shut all of these stories out, we get to a place where we're never going to get these powerful authentic stories. So
Yeah.
in a sense, I want to know what inspired you to write Sophie and Spot, and also how did you keep an authentic voice from escaping into the marketing side of it? Because you would have probably written
Mm.
the book a lot differently if you were thinking of, hey, I need to hit the big places for this, and I need to get published, and I need this to be turned into
Hmm.
a cartoon maybe one day and something like that. You would have probably changed your voice in that book. So, two-part question. How
Yeah.
do you come up with that? What inspired you, and then how do you keep true to yourself? Because a lot of readers, writers, and people listening here want to know how to be authentic in a space where you have to sell yourself.
Hmm. Yeah. I love the two-prong question with that. And I'll start with the first one. Um, the inspiration came from, at the time I was reading tons of kids' chapter books, um, had especially one kid who really wanted a dog. And the book that I created is not our story, it's fictionalized, but it was inspired by our kids' just overwhelming desire to have a dog. And it is funny, I do have to give credit. That kid of ours who was in third grade at the time, the whole class created this single book of publishing like page long stories, maybe 2 pages if it was, a really long one. And it was this whole publishing thing in their class. And so our child wrote a story about Sophie and Spot, and it was published in her book in school. And then she was like, "Why is your book taking so long?" And I was like, "Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And, this is not just a 1-page story. It's a chapter book. I think there's 180 pages or something. So I do have to give credit to her. And then it was also just really inspired by, again, place. And it's set in the town where I live. And all of to me, location and place is so important. So that includes things like the seasons or the weather or the natural landmark. The name Tadpole Press came from my experience by the creek. And so what was fun was figuring out what are the places that I love in my life and how can I incorporate those into a fictional story. And it was beautiful, and it was really fun to add those together. And then I don't know how, I just somehow knew that I was going to set the story to take place throughout the course of the main character, Sophie's third grade year. And initially, she was going to be in first grade. And I thought maybe I'll do a series and do 1 book for each year of elementary school. And then I realized I don't know that I'm really a series author. And this story felt very complete, with the exception of I started to write some poems afterward. But it all just kind of flowed together, and I knew kind of the overall arc of where the story was going. And I knew some of the themes I wanted to incorporate, but then each scene and each character that I started to create was a brand new surprise when I would sit down to write. So that's a little bit about the inspiration. And then your second question was, how did I maintain my authentic voice throughout? And I remember evaluating, because this was the first book that I was going to do as part of my career. And I evaluated what are the options for traditional publishing, what are the options for self-publishing. And the traditional publishing, one, it's exceptionally difficult to get picked up as a new author. And 2, I really didn't want to give up the creative control, because I knew what the story was in my head, and I knew what I wanted the cover to be. And I wanted to be able to create that the way that I saw it. And so it just made sense that I would look at self-publishing I didn't even try to do traditional publishing. And I wanted it to come out quicker. I didn't want to spend months or years pitching and dealing with rejections and just that whole process. I'm like, I have an idea. I want to share it with the world. And so I just made that decision to do self-publishing. And then, obviously included other people's opinions, such as critique partners and beta readers, and had different people do copy editing and whatnot. And so I think from the beginning, it was just, this is my project. And I'm very tuned in to kind of what my vision is. And where I struggle is when somebody has this very shiny, polished idea that sounds really good and tells me, no, this is how things should be. And I don't think I had many people doing that with Sophie and Spot. So it was easier, especially for my first book, to maintain my own vision and my own authentic voice and create the characters and the stories and the arc that I wanted to. So it was a fun process. And it was also, it's so vivid, and so like you get to know when you write something as long as a book, even if it's a kid's chapter book, you get to know these people almost as if they're real people. And I remember writing one scene where Sophie's dads are in the kitchen cooking, and I was getting hungry. It was about time for my lunch. And I just had to pull myself out of this fictional world where I was literally like creating this meal with my words and realize, oh my gosh, now I have to go out of my office into my kitchen and come up with real food that I can actually eat. And I was really disappointed because I just created this really fantastic food that I wanted to eat. And it was just kind of this odd like juxtaposition between the life and the vividness in your own mind and then the reality of I actually didn't cook that and I'm hungry. So now I have to go find something else to eat. So it was kind of funny, but fun too.
Yeah. And from what you're saying, um, thank you for sharing that, because the authenticity, I find, is an issue that a lot of writers, especially, and not just writers, but artists in general, especially new artists, are dealing with.
Mm,
And this is maybe a little more so for the average person who maybe isn't a writer. We can see this more in uh, fine arts like paintings, because a lot of people today will have a website and they'll have specials of send us a picture of your dog and we'll draw a portrait of your dog, for example. And that's
mhm,
how they pay the bills, right? And there'll be a
mhm.
lot of demands for that. But really, this artist wants to tell a story about something completely different. But the thing is, knowing that if they put, brushstrokes to canvas, it's not going to keep them alive. They may tell that
Mm,
story, but they may die telling that story. And so a lot of
mm,
people in the need of staying alive turn to, let me paint people's dogs' portraits or other things that matter to them, but maybe don't matter to me, but I'll do an excellent job of it because I'm talented in the art. And
mhm.
authenticity to me is always about, no, you have to somehow be communally protected to do what it is your purpose to do in your life, and
Yeah.
so um, that really builds on it for me. And that's part of what happened with me as well. You were a step ahead of me. I wrote the books that I did. Initially I had about
Mhm,
8 books that I'd written, never talked about it to anybody, never said nothing about it, just kept writing.
mhm.
And a friend of mine who was in the literary world said, "Can I see some of the writing?" And I said, "Sure." And they started looking on my laptop. I'm like, "Wow, some of this is really good. Do you mind if I
Yeah,
email some of this to myself?" And I said, "Sure." Didn't hear
yeah.
nothing. A few months later, I want to get you in touch with somebody at a publishing house. And I'm like, okay. And so an email comes through, and I see the email. I'm like, whoa, that's a huge publishing house, right? It's not a
Yeah.
normal place. Like, that's where celebrities go. And so yeah, I was like, wow, okay. So I got excited.
Yeah,
I fell into that whole, okay, yes, I would love them to publish my
yeah,
book. And then
yeah.
they came to me with the whole things that you were saying. I lost creative direction. I
Mhm,
was ordered to do certain things. And then a lot of what I was saying in the books had to do with sustainability. And they were like, and
mhm.
I was like, I want an alternative to print because, at this mass level, it's really bad.
Yeah,
And I can't say the same things I'm saying if I'm not participating in the solution,
right.
right? And I'm not going to get on a plane and travel through different states and different countries to promote the book at different locations and
Mhm,
do readings and stuff like that, because that also counters the whole
mhm.
concept that I'm coming with. And I try to explain this rationally, and they were like, but the profits. And there
Mm,
was, it was just, that's where it stopped. And then I
mhm,
learned, from my lawyer that, because I had to get a lawyer to look over things. And
mhm.
I learned from a lawyer that, hey, you don't own the books anymore. You don't own you anymore. They
Shoot.
own everything,
Yeah,
right? And I was like,
yeah,
but wait, what do you mean? But that's my writing. And they're like, yeah, it is your writing. You were the person who wrote it, but you're getting paid to
yeah.
not own yourself anymore. And I was like, so,
Yeah,
oh, okay, okay. And then the covers, like you said, you knew exactly what you wanted. I knew what I
mhm,
like to have on those covers. So, no, this is how we're going to do it. So it was
mhm.
just breaking apart at every step. And
Yeah,
at the end, I had to say, thank you. I will give up the fame. I will give up the success. I will give up the money,
mhm,
but I'd rather stay true to myself, because that's exactly what happened in my previous life. I left
yeah,
my fund management and all that success and everything because I thought there was something more that I should be doing. in the purpose of me existing as a human versus just making a lot of money and then dying,
Mm-hmm.
you know?
Yeah.
And so Compassiviste publishing happened, and you are telling, the same story in a more intelligent way, because you didn't, put yourself in that position to suffer through all of that. You said,
Mm.
I'm not going to give into that. I'm going to be more authentic than Ali, and I'm going to stick to my guns and do it the way I want to do it, which is what I should have done. But so, the lesson is essentially to everybody listening, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you really think this is what you should be doing and you love it, be true to yourself and keep at it, believe in it, keep at it, do it, tell the story, share the
Yes.
message, and reach out, because there's nothing like community and the support of your community to allow you to express and just grow with your expression, because there's love in
Mm-hmm.
that community versus trying to always target a financial deal. You may have
Yeah.
a beautiful song that related somehow to your upbringing, whereas your whole block or community or region can relate to it, but
Mm-hmm.
you may want to send it to a large music label and say, would you take on this song or my album or something? And they may not appreciate it, or they may even undervalue it or something, but you find success there. Whereas true
Yeah.
success is in relating that story to people who can understand and relate to it. So,
Mm-hmm.
thanks for sharing that. And
Yeah.
now
It
go ahead.
it very much reminds me of why I was interested in the work you were doing and why I reached out, because when I heard you on that first podcast, it literally blew my mind. You said something like, the book is not the physical thing, it's not the item. The book is just a way that you share your ideas with another person. And I was like, hold up, everybody. Did you hear that? Because it was the first time it really tuned into, what is it that we're doing? Are we trying to generate volumes and volumes of paper that is maybe going to be recycled or maybe not at the end of its life? Or are we trying to share a story or an idea or something that is going to inspire somebody and make them think? And it just got me so excited that you recognized that and pulled out and said, I'm going to do things my way.
Mhm.
And why I also love it is because, unfortunately, traditional publishing is very concerned about profits. And the way that they approach books is, here's our last book that was highly successful. How can you make your book as close to that as possible, whether it's in the cover design or the font or the story arc or the character development or whatever? And why I say unfortunately is because the result of that is it ends up making literature this so similar. And I've read enough in my life that what excites me is when I see something new, and
Mhm.
the way to diversify literature and tell different stories and honor different voices and do something utterly new and unique and creative and fun and mind blowing. That's what lights me up. And I was so delighted when you wrote back to my message, because I was like, there are people who are looking not just to homogenize literature and
Mhm.
increase profits and sell physical items. There's people who are really caring about the same things I care about and interested in broadening that exposure to really great ideas and fun stories. So it was just incredible.
Yeah, you're right. That's when I kind of realized. And again, going back to lessons from the Indigenous community, for me, that's where it kind of dawned on me. I said, the reason we have books in written form is because we don't have community like they do.
Mm,
They don't need the written form because they have community. They're so tight that the
mhm,
stories just relate generationally. But if I go into my own roots, where I'm born, stories were never written, they were told.
mm,
And there
mhm.
was this connectivity of the telling story. But then when
Yeah,
the Silk Road happened and trade happened and capitalism came in and we expanded our horizons from our communities,
yeah.
then the stories need to from one place to another
Mm-hmm.
physically, right? And so a
Mm-hmm.
story from here that was really nice, like a traveler would pass by and sit around the bonfire with your community as a guest of that night through their travels,
Yeah.
and they would hear the story and say, wow, this story is really touching. Do you mind if I write it down and share it? And so
Yeah.
we had to kind of, do something else because we couldn't record the voice then. We didn't have the tech. So,
Mm-hmm.
the written word, so to speak, became the thing, which was
Yeah.
fine. It's not a problem. But the thing is, like you said, I started thinking about we're doing, word counts and dollars per word and profit.
Mm-hmm.
It's become this mathematical
Yes.
situation now, whereas we're losing the context. Like the idea of a book
Mm-hmm.
is my mind in your household now. On your
Yeah.
coffee table, my mind is sitting there as well. It's sharing its
Mm-hmm.
content with you because that's what I wanted to share.
Yeah.
Yet that's not the way the industry sends it along. And, I'm going to ask you this:
Mm-hmm.
authenticity and the honest art of storytelling from a vulnerable and distinctly personal place
Mm-hmm.
ultimately helps diversify literature, like you said, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, it doesn't make everything look the same and build on one success. You have one success story, like even Harry Potter.
Mm-hmm.
Suddenly you have 12 other Harry Potter lookalikes with
Yeah.
slightly different settings, slightly something, but it's the same story. I really
Yeah.
enjoy that original version of that story, right? And let's keep it that way. Why doesn't somebody come up with something really fascinatingly new? More importantly, in turn, the progress of inclusivity happens in the genuine storytelling beyond this dangerous space for me, which we call tolerance, and we uphold it in community. I find tolerance dangerous and a social problem because intolerance, even the most stoic humans in the world, will eventually lose patience. It's
Mm.
inherent in the definition of tolerance. It means you are tolerating something you don't like or you don't appreciate or you don't agree with.
Mm.
You're withstanding it. You're at best maybe peacefully accepting it. But it also means to tolerate also means this extent is in there, right? I'm tolerating this much of it or this much of it or a little more of it. But eventually, how much tolerating is there until you say no? That's the meaning of tolerance. Whereas for
Mm.
me, inclusion is where we
Mm-hmm.
truly accept the difference and diversity. And, that it's the space I want to live in, not where others tolerate me in the sense that here's a different voice, even if it's interesting, but he's always different. He'll never
Right.
be part of us. She'll never, nobody will be part of us because we're tolerating them in our community, right? And there's a
Yes.
lot of tolerance going on right now. Even
Mm-hmm.
nationally, I mean, in the US, there's a lot of tolerance going on politically, socially, racially, even with income, there's tolerance going on.
Mm-hmm.
The homeless population being a social problem per se for the wealthy people or the wealthy regions because, oh, my house is going to devalue because of this social problem, not because of
Mm.
humans who we're
Mm-hmm.
supposed to help, right? But inclusivity doesn't look at it that way. Again, it looks at it from a different perspective. What are your thoughts about that in kind of from the work that you do and again the background and the life that you've
Mm-hmm.
experienced?
Yeah. I really caught something you said with the tolerance piece. You said we're tolerating these different people in our community. And that's what it ties back to is, oh, the ownership, the
Mm-hmm.
community is this group of people, and we'll tolerate
The
interacting a little
guests.
bit, but the ownership, the belongingness,
Mm.
the essence of the community, when it's split. And so that it just gets to kind of the fundamental design of a dominant culture versus a marginalized community, and having that inclusion piece and having more equity means it's not just your place anymore, it's all of our place. We all belong here, and how can we all be included? And it's tough because you come up with conflicts on, well, how should things go under this value? How do we run things in this way? And it is really tough to listen to different viewpoints. But it's also, there's something so validating and powerful about it to be able to say, this is this place, whether it's a physical location or a place in the publishing world, or, the words on paper, this place belongs to all of us and all of our voices have a right to be heard. That's what gets me excited. And that's where that inclusion piece becomes really powerful. And I think it's just, as a writer and as somebody who is in the publishing world and also as a reader, I'm drawn to those places because I love having the option to see something different than the standard story. And you read enough and you start to recognize, oh, we're confining everybody's voice into this, design that is going to hopefully be the most profitable, but it's not always the most interesting. And what's
Or
interesting to me is,
purposeful.
or purposeful, yeah. And what's interesting to read for me as a reader is something that stands out and comes at things in an entirely new way. And it lights me up and energizes me and makes me pay attention. Like when I heard your that quote from the podcast, I literally had to like stop and tell everybody that I was around at the moment and be like, oh my God, this idea, who knows how long it's been out there, but it's the first time I heard it. And it just like made me pause time for a second and get really excited, and it simultaneously expand all the ideas of, oh my gosh, if that's true, then this could be true. And just like, wow, it was mind blowing.
Interesting.
Yeah.
It all comes down to understanding inclusion, I think. The misunderstanding between tolerance and inclusion, and I think we do that with children a lot, is we teach them to tolerate, or we teach them to maybe learn about different cultures as a sign of respect, but never to include them as a part of us. And like you said, there's always this space where there's a break. There's us and
Yeah.
them all the time. There's some kind of ownership involved, and it's never ours, right?
Yeah.
And so, you're right about that. I'm going to touch on a couple of questions because I think they're important in the sense of people listening and people who are after this show going to read Sophie and Spot, because I tell everybody to read it. I want to speak first about gender. What is gender to you? How do we identify gender? And for example, somebody may ask me, you know, are you a man or woman? And I say that's a question of sex. Are you male, female? That's a question of gender. Then I ask myself, what is a male? Who started this definition? What was it stated on? How do I recognize that? And before your answer, I'll just say this much. I thought about this a lot myself, and I think biologically I'm comfortable differentiating between the different biologies in the world of living organisms, whatever they may be, right? Some don't have the differences we do, and some do, and so you can't look at bacteria and think about it in the same reproductive mechanisms as a dolphin, right? So I can understand the biological scientific differentiations in the discussion about sex from a scientific perspective. Then when you come into the generalized conversation of gender, I think to myself, maybe the fact that a lot of people can associate with different terminologies and definitions is not because they found the perfect definition, but it's because we may be agender, in the sense that agender to me means there is no such thing as picking a dot on a certain sphere and saying I am him, or I am she, or I am whatever, right? It's more so that I am the circle. Within the circle, or within the spectrum, I can select the places that I want to fall on in terms of where I fall on in that moment. And I kind of like a quantum physics mechanism of gender, where you could be in two places at the same time, and based on the situation that you fall into, choose which one you want to show yourself as. So I may be in a situation of, I don't know, somebody may push me. And at that moment, I could be two different people. And now it's up to me to select whether I calm the situation down, which I call, for example, the feminine, loving approach to things, saying it's okay, doesn't matter. I'm sure it was a mistake. Or doing the fiercely masculine version of things, of saying, okay, I'm a black belt, so I'm going to just attack you and destroy you right now and win and be the hero, for example. So that choice, both of them are there for me. I think I could have identified myself as a male if I didn't have the other choice ever, if it was non-existent, if my nature or myself or my brain even, biologically was wired in a way that could not afford me the apology, or could not afford me the, bringing it down a notch. But because it can afford me the same kind of reactions as a woman in her mind, therefore I cannot be any different. So to me, that's how I've identified gender, as this, I call it a new industry in a sense, because we've created all of this chaos around it, and it is media. But in essence, we can act in the same way 24. You and I can act completely identically in every motion, other than a biological difference that we can't help. Like, I can't breastfeed. That's a biological thing, but it doesn't mean I cannot love a child. There's no thing that says if you did not breastfeed this child, you are not allowed to love this child. So that's, to me, gender issues, right? That's the way I see it. So your explanation.
Yeah, it is. I think you're touching on that crucial distinction that confuses a lot of people, which is gender and biological sex. Because really in the past, those have kind of been forced to align. And we're at this new phase where gender identity and expression is exploding and just getting
It's
kind of like
liberty.
this. Yeah. Yeah. And so I think it is still a little confusing for a lot of people. But I think what you're touching on is, yes, there is the biological sex, which is male, female, intersex. And that was my patriarchy. I notice when we tend to do little lists, almost always people start with the male name first, he and then she. And I've noticed it now when I'm saying it, and I'm like, man, that is still programmed in there.
Yeah, that's embedded into our heads, right? Because
Yes.
we come from that culture. We grew up
Yes.
in the worst of it, so to speak. So,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah. And so that's where we start, because that's the first identifier. Like, that's our place, to who's belonging, who's being tolerated. So anyway, catching myself on that, that's the biological sex, and that can, look different in how people's bodies are come together. But the gender is so much more of a social construct, and we can choose to be it. And I guess when I say the word choose, it's not so much of I'm going to invent something, but it's what's the word I want to say, because it is kind of, you are being programmed in society to behave with certain characteristics if once you're assigned a gender. And I think some people are very tuned in to that either works for me and I love it, and I very highly identify as this certain gender, or from a very young age, a lot of people are like, is everybody around me trying to tell me what books to read, what clothes to wear, what emotions to experience, how to express those, what sports to play. We live in this very divided world. And I do think at some point we are going to evolve the way we evolved with race, where we realized that with segregation, separate is not equal. And my hope is that people don't continue to bifurcate the world as intensely as we are currently based on gender, And for me, I think the reason I didn't know the word agender until the last few years, but I did know that when somebody told me how to behave according to an
Mm,
assigned gender, it very much rubbed me the wrong way. And it was funny because even if I wasn't that interested in toy I was playing with, if somebody said I was playing with the wrong toy, I was like, well, this is my favorite. Now I'm doubling down and I'm
mm,
going to show you that I
mhm,
can play with this toy. And similarly, as I grew, it's literally all over the place.
mhm,
And both, in terms of how you present yourself, as well as how you, like you mentioned, feminine being soft and
mhm.
loving, and masculine as being, black belt
Aggressive, yeah.
aggressive. But I would say every human has those two qualities
Mhm,
within them. And as somebody who's a gender, I've just kind of seen again, like as the child, oh, this is optional. This culture is, you see behind the curtain a little bit, and realizing I just, I'm more interested in just being a human, and I want to experience all the friendships and all the emotions and all the books or all the sports, whatever it is that I'm interested in, not because this certain thing has been assigned to me because of my gender.
mm.
So that's a
It's like
little
it's
bit.
like the liberty of actually, liberty in the sense of freedom of
Mhm,
choice, right? I mean,
mhm,
never mind an amendment or a human right, but the truth of freedom of choice. I mean, it's part of our being to have freedom of
mhm,
choice, and so that's what you're advocating for: the ability to
mhm.
have that freedom to be who you want to be,
Yes,
as opposed to ladies don't do that. You know,
exactly.
yeah, that's what it's about. And the second part of this would be race, which you touched on as well.
Mhm,
How do you identify with race? Because I find that we are, or at least we should be, so interconnected in the world we live in today, even if it's by technology, even if it's not by physical interconnectedness, but even just by technology. It's less the genetic traits and the lineages that should matter, and more what we are signaling through soul or heart to wish to be, in the sense of that human representation that you speak about when, at the end of your sentence, is I just want to be human. And
mhm,
um, I find that a lot of things are outdated that I still kind of watch, and I get this inner voice keep telling me that. For example, the Olympics. Um, we recently had the Olympics in the summer
mhm,
and the Paralympics, and in both of them, I'm thinking, what is an American for a gold medal versus a British for a gold? Like, how much of this is real? Because this Chinese athlete who won the gold medal trains and lives in this country all their life. Like, should they not be that just because they hold a passport? Like, what is the identifier
mm,
of race anymore,
mhm,
right? I mean, here I am this race, but I live in that country, or I grew up there, I was even born there, but somehow I relate to another race. And
mhm.
it's just we've become so intermixed, in a way, interconnected in so many
Yeah.
facets, that I don't even understand what race means, other than, for me at least, to identify the places where we are hurting and harming people.
Mm,
I
mhm.
understand race when it comes to a specific minority in a specific place that is being oppressed and abused, because we need to
Yeah.
watch out that that is happening at a racial level. But
Mhm.
aside from the pain, in the happiness of it and the freedom of it, what is race anymore, right? That's the way
Yeah.
I think about it. So how do you see this?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. I think I read somewhere it's not like there is a biological definition of race.
Hmm.
I think people want to do the DNA tests like it's
Mm,
somehow embedded, that there is this massive distinction that shows. And it's more, we're a human race. And to me, when I say I'm biracial, I'm drawing on the two different cultures,
mhm,
because race to me, aside from the oppression that you're talking about, is very linked to culture, and that common history or common values. And it is a different experience having, my mentality as a white person
Mm-hmm.
and having my mentality as a Native American person.
Mm-hmm.
And most people, when they look at me, they just see somebody who's white. And so there's this kind of effort to reclaim and to say that's not all of who I am. And
Mm.
obviously, it's not every conversation, it doesn't need to be said. But again, there's also just this reclaiming within a lot of Native communities right now of so much of our culture and our language and our customs and our ways of being and our values have had to go underground in order to survive. Like you mentioned, I think you called them residential schools. I've
Mm.
heard of them as Indian boarding schools or just the general discrimination. And now there's kind of this rebirth of let's tap into
Mm-hmm.
the culture and the language. My tribe's doing weekly language classes. Some tribes are doing bilingual um, schools that young kids starting kindergarten are now getting to grow up with both languages.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just beautiful to see the different ways of being and different ways of life being honored. And so that's a little bit about what it means to me and kind of how my thoughts are on that, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
it does. Especially, it resonates with me because a lot of times people ask where you're from, and
Mm,
they refer to that racial where you're from, or they say, I hear
mhm,
an accent. What is that? Or
mhm,
something they pick up on. And then I want to say I'm Canadian because a lot of my values, like you said, a lot of the values that I uphold are
yeah.
traditionally values that the country was built on, so to speak. The history
Mhm,
of that country was kind of, you know, the togetherness of that country came across with. And those are values I hold within me. But then I think to
mhm,
myself, am I even allowed to say that? Because that's
mm,
not what they're asking about. That they're asking about, where are the biological people who made you from?
mm,
Right.
mhm,
And how do we dissect you and compartmentalize you into a specific spot where we can put you there and we can kind of understand your behavior because you come from here. And
right.
it's normal now. If you, for example, ate your food by hand, it's normal because that culture eats by hand. But if you said
Mhm,
you're Canadian and you ate by hand, it'd be like, whoa,
yeah.
that's not normal because you should be using a fork. You see what I mean? So it's
Yeah.
like that compartmentalization happens. And then I think you touched on something really powerful, and I'm going to take this with me. um, Social aspect of race versus the physical aspect of race.
Mhm,
And now I want to take you back to your email. And when you
mhm,
first emailed me, and I quote, you said, share my appreciation and celebrate our connectedness with no expectation of a response,
mhm,
which was, to me, really touching because, there's a lot of openness, there's a lot of comfort, and there's a lot of vulnerability in that message of saying, I just wanted to throw that out there. I don't care if you turn around and say thank you or
yeah.
not. This is what I wanted to say. That's all. That's where it stopped. The rest is yours
Yeah.
to do with as you wish, right?
Yeah.
And what have you learned from this exercise that you can leave as a parting gift for our audience? Because you did something where you planted kind of, a fruit for me, or thank you, or
Mm,
something that
mhm,
uplifted me, right? You just planted that and you walked away. Now,
mhm,
all of the beauty of all of the fun of it, all of the excitement of it, the happiness, the joy that it brings, the fulfillment was for me to take. There was
yeah.
none for you because there was no reciprocity here. There was no sharing. There was nothing. It was just a one-way reach,
Yeah.
right? Explain that, because I think if we can start to understand how to do that without the expectations that come attached with certain things, and without even
Mhm,
having the anger later of saying, what a bad person. I sent them this
yeah.
beautiful note. I put my time and effort into it. Um, they don't even get that many views anyways, and this is how they were. That's why that, and then the whole
Mhm,
spiel comes out, and then all the anger and frustration comes up. But if we really do it from the heart in a way that, I just did this because this is what I wanted to do, there's
yeah.
so much more love that opens up. So explain that strategy for us so everybody can learn.
Yeah. Yes, it was very intentional. And I think I started this specific gratitude practice because I was in a place where I was feeling really stuck energetically. And I have written gratitudes for years. That's just been part of my practice is writing down little things I'm grateful for each day. It doesn't have to be anything big. But I intentionally made the choice to share the gratitudes with other people out there in the world who inspired me in real life. And part of the reason I did it is because before I started at the time, I was reaching out to find a special guest judge for our Tadpole Press 100-word writing contest. We offer the contest twice a year, and there's one judge who just comes on as a rotating special guest judge. And I had been sending out little invitations to people, and there was a few people in a row back to back who either didn't respond at all or who said thanks for the offer but no. And I was just like, wow, how, I am offering, this is a paid position. You get exposure, but I'm not getting the people interested. And I'm in this place of having to ask for something. And it just felt like it was kind of weighing on me and weighing on them. And so I wanted to shift it and realize I'm not in a position of need. I actually have so much wealth to give. And I'm so connected to so many people, whether it's because I've read a book or listened to a podcast or somehow experienced this person's ideas or stories coming to me. It created a sense of really wealth and connectedness and generosity. I wasn't alone. And so I just thought, you know what? This person gave me this new insight, and that's such a gift. And I can give them a little gift back because also as artists or authors or people who put themselves out there, you might not know if it ever actually resonates with anybody. And it's this, you want to share it with the world. And some people will love it and some people will hate it and some people will be in the middle, but not most people are going to listen or read or consume that in some form and then carry on with their lives. But to have somebody reverse and come back and say, hey, I see you. I appreciated what you did. You made me think about this, or this touched me in this way. And by the way, I'm not asking for anything. If you want to read the email, you can, spend a few minutes of your time on that. And if people delete the email, okay, that's fine too. But really just giving something back with no expectation whatsoever that I will get anything in return, except that it reminds me in the act of doing it, how many people have touched my life and how I have the power to touch other people's lives. And that to me is the purpose behind it. I don't need anything else to come from it. But the fact that you did get into my website and turn around and respond, I was like, oh my gosh, I just found a kindred soul. Like it's unexpected and it's such a huge gift. And I didn't know if I would ever hear from you or a quick thank you that made my day, or all of a sudden now we're partnering on multiple projects. Like it's really, there's no strings attached, and it's just kind of this trust and faith in the universe.
It's the non-transactional approach that I try
Yes.
to, tell people about always. I say, don't reach people trying to buy them.
Yeah.
Reach people trying to express what they want to be a part of. I have another person that I partner with on other things as well. Her name's Marianne. Amazing person. And she was the person who really opened this up for me in philanthropy. She said, all of these things people do to try to get donations, just whack. Because I really believe if you touch people who are in the zone of the cause, they will always relate to the cause. So, unfortunately, if, you go to refugees who have done well moving to, say, the United States, and you remind them of that boat ride and the problems and losing a child along the way and everything else, and tell them you can help. Now you've got $20 million in the bank. You can help by giving $10,000 towards making sure that this refugee comes across safely. They are much more readily going to appreciate and remember that journey and everything else than
Mm.
if you go to some person and say, look, let me show you how this helps your tax benefits and it becomes a write-off and all these
Mhm.
spiel to get $10,000 from them. So
Yeah.
it's non-transactional, authentic relationship building, and that's community, right? And I think
Yes.
that's why we're doing so much together, is because there is that interconnectedness, there is that community
Mhm.
building, and it just grows from there, and it becomes a bond that doesn't have a shelf life either, because it doesn't have a dollar value on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
We've never sat there and had these conversations. Well, no, I think I should get more because I'm worth this, and it's always been very, the money doesn't matter in a sense. It's not a
Mhm.
financial discussion. There's the purpose that matters. So thank you for everything you've said. And I'm sure everybody's going to take a lot from this conversation along. And then reading Sophie and Spot, they're going to read it with, a very different perspective, especially for those reading it with their children. Now, before I
Yeah.
let you go, how do
Yeah.
people get in touch with you? And, what should they expect and want reaching out to Tadpole Press? And people have told me, why do you speak with people who have, who are competitors? Why do you,
Mm.
promote competitors? And I say, who's promoting a competitor? And they say, well, specifically with your episode, my team was like, that is a competitor. It's a publishing house. It cannot get more competitive than that. And I said, I never look at Amber in that way, because she's telling stories. I'm telling stories. The more stories we
Mhm.
tell, even together, the more the purpose of why we're doing this is
Mhm.
resonating. I never found in Amber, her talking to me about, oh, you should read this book because this is the person who made, I don't know, this huge publishing house. This is the person that made Random House. So
Yeah.
you should read their autobiography, and then we can merge and we can do this and become the next giant publisher. She never spoke about those things. It was always about purpose and value and
Mhm.
telling the story. So I don't see the competitiveness here. I don't see the competition. So I'm
Yeah.
going to promote Amber as much as I can, and everybody else, in when their heart is in the right place, right? Because
Yeah.
you cannot look at it as competition. So in that sense, I have absolutely no problem with every listener here um, appreciating everything you said and going to you and saying, I have a book, or I heard your podcast, or I, want to work with you for some reason. Great, because that is the purpose of this whole thing. The whole
Yeah.
purpose of Compassiviste is to just grow that element, however it may
Yeah.
be, right? So how do people reach you, and, what should they want from Tadpole Press?
Absolutely. I love that kind of insight to the background with your team. And I do want to say, so yes, I started Tadpole Press to self-publish some of my writing, and I don't I don't accept writing from other people. I People who want to be published by a publishing house, that's perfect to go to you, and I've shared with my email list the times that you've announced you're open for submissions for your anthology. And
Mm.
I was published in that once. And then even still on the months that I didn't submit anything, just, hey, here's an opportunity, because that provides value to my community as well. To
Mm-hmm.
say, here's somebody who's doing great work. Here's an opportunity for you to share your story. And what we focus on primarily at Tadpole Press now is the Tadpole Press 100 word writing contest, which we have a team of judges and entries from all around the world, all ages, and my own writing. In my own writing, yes, Sophie and Spot was originally published under Tadpole Press, but you came in to my life at the perfect time and the perfect moment where I had started to move away a little bit into other pieces and, start to focus on different things I was writing. And you're like, I really want to get back and talk about Sophie and Spot. And I was like, you know what? I never thought that I would be working with another publisher for this book, but your excitement for the story and your energy and your continued passion, I was like, this is perfect way
And I want to tell
to
the whole book so much on this conversation. I would keep going like that, and stopping from
Yeah.
giving anything away. So I'm not saying a word about the story other than you have to read it.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's beautiful that it's found a new home with somebody who has that level of excitement and passion. And yeah, it's not so much a competition thing as it is a how can we collaborate? And community building is such an important piece of our writing contest. We do community write-ins leading up to it and just bringing people together. So as for your question of where can people find us, the best place to go would be our welcome page. And that is tadpolepress.com/welcome. So tadpole, like the baby frog, press, PRESS.com/welcome. And that just gives you a little insight into what to expect. You get about 2 emails from us focused on positivity, authenticity, creative inspiration. That's also where we'll announce, insights into the contest when pieces of my blog are published. And, another way that we've collaborated is Joanna from your team wrote a guest blog, which was perfect because it was at a time where, as much as I want to write a new piece every month, there was a lot going on in my life. And I was like, this is actually a great way, especially because Joanna Craven is coming on to help judge the contest, now. And so it's less of cutting each other down and more of bringing
Building
both
each
of us
other up.
up. Yeah.
And Joanna's a lifeline. Without Joanna, Compassiviste Publishing would not happen. I'll tell you that
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
I merely had an idea based on my own experiences of what should be.
Mm-hmm.
And I came into this space, and literally, whether you believe in God or the force of the universe, whatever you want to call that entity, that power
Mm-hmm.
literally put Joanna in front of me for out of nowhere. I didn't know
Mm-hmm.
this person. I had no clue who she was. She's from Australia, Melbourne,
Wow.
and Compassiviste is based out of the UK. And,
Yeah.
I'm coming all the way from Toronto, and there was no way for me to know who this person is. And, you know, and I don't read the books that she writes. She writes fiction stories, and I
Mm-hmm.
strictly read like philosophy, stuff that I grew up kind of going to school for, politics and stuff,
Yeah.
history, and real life issues. And so, there was no way for me to even learn of this author. And then she came on so quickly. One thing led to another. I said, "Look, I don't know what I'm doing here. You want to take over?" She's like, "Sure." Next thing you know, we're working. The Compassiviste
Yeah.
publishing happened. So, I really believe there was some kind of a spiritual want for this to
Yeah.
become and grow. And, you get that feeling that the world's with you
Mm-hmm.
on this, like every
Yeah.
force is there for you. And I really felt that way. So she's great. She's amazing. So
Yeah.
if you ever watch this or hear it, thank you very much for being here, Joanna. From the both of us.
Absolutely.
Amber,
Absolutely.
thank you so much for speaking on Compassiviste Dialogues, and thank you, friend who walks with spirits, for your inspiring perspective on community, inclusivity, and purpose, and gender, and everything you've enlightened us with. To our audience, please subscribe to the Compassiviste Dialogues channel and share this so more people can resonate with the storytelling and the impact of our individual and valuable stories and inclusion in our communities at a time where we need it more ever. Follow us on our social media. All links to Amber's Tadpole Press and Compassiviste are listed below. We are here to help change the world together. I'm Ali. Thank you.